The sky above Zathra boiled with fire. Black clouds swirled in unnatural patterns, torn apart by streaks of plasma as human ships burned in orbit. Fragments of metal rained down, fiery trails carving across the horizon. The ground trembled under every distant impact. Each one another ship, another life, another scream cut short. At the heart of the ruin, a lone figure stood against the impossible. Captain Elias Kyle was a soldier of the Terran Expeditionary Corps, but to look at him now, few would believe he had once led a squad. His combat armor was half melted, chest plate cracked and scorched. One pauldron hanging by a strap. His rifle lay shattered in the dust behind him, its barrel snapped during the last skirmish. His blade was gone, ripped from his hand when the horde pressed him against the citadel steps. His face was streaked with blood and grime, his breathing shallow, but his eyes, cold, sharp, defiant, still burned. Below him stretched the plaza of the citadel, once a sacred place for the Veyrak, now just another graveyard. Hundreds of corpses littered the square, human and alien alike, blood soaking into the cracked black stone. The air stank of scorched flesh, molten metal, and ozone from energy weapons, and across that broken square, an army waited. 300 Veyrak warriors stood in formation, their armor glistening like obsidian scales, their towering frames casting long shadows under the blood-red sun. Their war spears thrummed with a low, dangerous hum, each weapon alive with a caged storm. The air between them flickered with stray arcs of plasma, sizzling the ground, marking the raw power coiled at their fingertips. They were not afraid of him. They had hunted him since dawn, forcing him back step by step until he had no escape left. What they feared, what they hated, was the thing etched into his hand. Elias flexed his fingers, feeling the heat throb under his skin. The mark blazed, faintly. Lines of molten fire that pulsed with every heartbeat. It looked like a sigil burned into his flesh, ancient and alien, alive with something he couldn't name. It hadn't left him since the temple. It burned when he fought, burned when he bled, and burned now like it hungered for release. From the front of the Veyrak line, their commander stepped forward. The alien was massive, easily twice Elias's size, wrapped in armor marked with jagged symbols. His war spear was longer than Elias was tall, its blade glowing with searing blue fire. He carried himself with the weight of centuries, his movements deliberate as though he had faced 1,000 such battles and always won. When he spoke, his guttural voice carried across the plaza, amplified by the spear's resonance. "Kneel." "Human!" he thundered. "The flame you carry does not belong to you. It belongs to the ancients. You are a thief of holy fire." The words echoed off the ruins, heavy with conviction. Around him, the 300 warriors raised their weapons. High, a forest of blazing spears aimed at one exhausted man. The ground shook as they stomped in unison, their chant rising in deep alien tones. It was a death song, his death song. Elias's body screamed for him to give in. His lungs burned, his legs trembled, and his vision blurred from blood loss. He had no army left behind him, no weapon in his hand, no hope in reason. Logic said, kneel and die, but he wasn't built for kneeling. Elias raised his head, locking eyes with the towering commander. His lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile, a soldier's final defiance. He didn't move to surrender. He didn't even speak. Instead, he lifted his hand. The glowing mark shone brighter, heat spilling into the air like the sun breaking through storm clouds. The light cut across the plaza, painting alien armor in white fire. The Veyrak chant faltered, their lines shifting uneasily. A ripple of silence spread outward. Spears wavered. The commander's eyes narrowed, but he didn't lower his weapon. "That fire will consume you," he warned. Elias clenched his fist, then snapped it open. The mark pulsed, a sharp flare of brilliance that sent shadows lashing across the ruins. The energy surged outward in a low, thrumming wave, not yet an attack, but a promise. And for the first time since the battle began, the battlefield was utterly still. The ash-filled wind whispered through broken towers, carrying the tension of 1,000 unspoken words. 300 spears hovered in the air, frozen between certainty and fear. One human, half dead, stood, alone with nothing but a mark on his hand, and every warrior in that square felt the weight of it. The war drums quieted. The chants died. The silence itself was an enemy, pressing down on all of them. Elias did not kneel. The Veyrak did not strike. For a single, suspended heartbeat, the fate of 2 species teetered on the edge of fire. Weeks before the Plaza standoff, Elias Kale had landed on Zathra, believing it would be a straightforward campaign. The Terran Expeditionary Corps wasn't new to war. Humanity had clawed its way across the stars, fighting pirates, raiders, and the scattered empires that tried to block their expansion, but nothing in his training prepared him for the Veyrak. The war for Zathra began the moment human boots touched its soil. At first, intelligence reports painted the planet as sparsely defended. Recon drones picked up only scattered signs of activity, small settlements, ancient ruins, pockets of resistance. Command thought it would be quick, a resource sweep, a few skirmishes, victory within weeks. Then the first true clash happened. Elias remembered the night vividly. The sky lit up as Veyrak war skimmers descended like predators, their hulls dark and jagged, their engines screaming like torn metal. Warriors leapt from the crafts, massive figures in black armor, their spears alive with caged lightning. His squad's rifles cut through the dark, but the bolts barely slowed the enemy. Hold. The line! Elias had shouted as plasma fire hammered their position. The ground split under spear strikes, molten scars gouged deep into stone. One by one, his soldiers fell, their screams drowned by the crackle of electricity. Sergeant Diaz was vaporized. In a single hit, Corporal Wren was torn apart trying to drag wounded comrades back to cover. The rest were scattered. By dawn, Elias' squad was gone. He lived only because he kept moving, fighting with desperation rather than discipline. The Veyrak weren't warriors in the human sense. They were storms given flesh. Each one fought, as if every strike was backed by centuries of devotion. That was when he first heard the word holy. The Veyrak didn't just defend Zathra. They worshipped it. Their chants echoed across the battlefield, a constant reminder that this was more than a war over territory. Every ruin was a shrine, every stone sacred. And the crystals, the shimmering, humming clusters buried deep beneath the planet's surface, were the heart of it all. Those crystals were what humanity needed. Without them, faster-than-light drives would slow, supply lines would collapse, colonies would starve. Zathra wasn't just another planet. It was survival. But for the Veyrak, the crystals weren't resources. They were the flame of the ancients, fragments of their gods. To touch them without permission was heresy. To take them was war. Elias discovered this firsthand when he stumbled into the great temple. He hadn't meant to. He was bleeding, staggering through jungle ruins while Veyrak scouts hunted him. The temple loomed like a broken fang, walls carved with alien script glowing faintly in the gloom. Inside, a single crystal floated above a pedestal, humming with a sound that vibrated through his bones. He had meant only to steady himself. His hand fell against the crystal, and in an instant, fire consumed him. It wasn't flame in the human sense. It was light and heat and force all at once, searing into his veins, carving something onto his flesh. His scream shook the chamber, and he collapsed to the floor, expecting to die. But when he woke, the mark remained, a blazing sigil etched into his palm, glowing faintly even in shadow. The Veyrak arrived soon after, their spears leveled at his throat. Elias had no weapon, no strength to resist. Yet when they saw the mark, they froze. Some hissed in rage, calling him thief. Others lowered their heads, whispering words he didn't understand. Chosen of the flame. Bearer. Marked one. They didn't strike him down. They backed away as if afraid. Elias didn't understand then, but later he would learn the stories. The mark was part of their oldest prophecy, that the flame would one day burn in the hand of an outsider, a stranger who would either unite the Veyrak or bring about their end. Rumors spread fast. Soldiers told stories of a Terran with fire in his veins. Some Veyrak began to fear him. Others called for his execution before the prophecy could unfold. Either way, he was no longer just a soldier. He had become a symbol. For humanity, the mark was both miracle and weapon. Commanders whispered about using Elias as a rallying point, a figure to inspire troops who had been losing hope. For the Veyrak, his existence was an insult, a desecration that demanded vengeance. And so, 300 warriors were sent to cleanse the mark from his flesh, to erase the human who had dared to touch their god's flame. Elias never asked for this. He never wanted to be chosen. But every time the mark pulsed with heat, he felt the truth. Whether curse or gift, it had tied him to Zathra. His life was no longer his own. The plaza erupted in chaos the moment the first spear struck. A shriek of energy split the air as the Veyrak horde surged forward, 300 warriors moving with terrifying unity. The ground shook beneath their charge, the impact of armored feet rattling broken stone. The sound was like thunder, thunder laced with the crackling hiss of plasma. Elias braced himself on the cracked steps, his vision swimming. He should have died where he stood. But the mark in his palm ignited the moment the spearheads closed in. A shockwave burst from his hand. The air turned white-hot, a wave of fire blasting outward in all directions. Energy weapons sputtered, shields shorted, and dozens of warriors were hurled back like rag dolls, their armor glowing red before crashing into the rubble. The wave tore into the earth itself, carving molten lines through the plaza. Elias staggered back, his chest heaving. His body wasn't built for this. The fire drained him, stealing his breath and strength with every pulse. His bones ached as if the power wanted to tear him apart from the inside. But the Veyrak weren't finished. They regrouped instantly, disciplined even in shock. A dozen broke off and flanked him from the left, spears sparking with contained storms. Another wave closed from the right, driving him off the stairs into the broken square below. Elias moved on instinct. His hand cut through the air, arcs of fire trailing from his palm like ribbons. Every strike left searing scars in armor, every counter burned through weapons. One warrior lunged. Elias caught the spear with his bare hand. Metal screamed as it melted in his grasp. He shoved forward, sending a blast of heat through the alien's chest plate. The warrior crumpled in silence. Another came from behind. Elias spun, his palm slamming into the warrior's stomach. Fire exploded outward, sending the alien flying back into a wall that collapsed under the impact. Dust and debris choked the air. Still they came. For every one he dropped, 5 pressed forward. Their formation was relentless, a tide of obsidian, bodies, and lightning spears. He couldn't kill them all. His breath tore at his lungs, his limbs grew heavy, and the mark blazed too bright, its hunger clawing at his flesh. Above, the battle raged in the sky. Human and Veyrak ships tangled in violent arcs of light. Dropships screamed through the atmosphere only to explode before reaching the ground. Fireballs lit the heavens like falling suns. The comms in Elias's ear crackled with dying voices. "We can't hold. Pulling back. No survivors." Then silence. Humanity was losing. He knew it in his gut. If the fleet broke, the soldiers on the ground would be abandoned, slaughtered to the last. But surrender wasn't in his blood. Elias charged forward into the horde, a man against an army. He drove his glowing fist into one warrior's chest, sending shards of molten armor spraying into another's face. He ducked under a sweeping spear, pivoted, and thrust his palm upward. Fire surged like a cannon blast, flinging 3 Veyrak into the air. His boots slipped on blood and ash, but he kept moving, each step a refusal to fall. A spear grazed his side, tearing through armor and searing flesh. Pain blinded him. He roared, swinging his arm wide, and unleashed another wave of fire. The plaza lit up like a forge. Veyrak bodies crashing into stone, their war cries faltering, but the fire inside him roared louder, demanding more, demanding everything. His veins burned, his vision dimmed at the edges. The mark wasn't just lending him power, it was consuming him, bleeding him dry. He realized with cold clarity that if he let it, it would kill him before the Veyrak ever could. Yet he pressed on. Because if he stopped, humanity's last chance ended here. Through the haze of battle, he saw the towering commander watching from the far side of the square. The alien hadn't moved yet, spear gripped tightly, eyes locked on Elias with something more than hatred, something like fear. Elias's chest heaved. Sweat stung his eyes. His legs buckled for an instant, but he forced himself upright, refusing to bow. The battlefield swirled around him, fire, blood, steel, and screams. He was one. Man, they were an army. But so long as he stood, the fight wasn't over. The war in orbit was a nightmare painted across the heavens. From the ruined plaza, Elias could see flashes of battle high above, streaks of plasma and bursts of fire trailing across the sky. Human. Ships twisted desperately between barrages of energy fire, their hulls glowing red before breaking apart. Veyrak dreadnoughts moved with cold precision, vast shadows blotting out the sun as their cannons unleashed beams that cut through entire squadrons. The comm in Elias's ear crackled alive with Admiral Vaynar's strained voice. "Terran forces, hold! We cannot retreat. If we fail here, Earth dies with us." Static swallowed his words, but the meaning was clear. They weren't fighting for territory anymore. They were fighting for survival. The Resolute, humanity's command vessel, was taking the brunt of the assault. Elias had served aboard her once. He could picture the crew at their stations, refusing to abandon their posts even as firestorms tore through the decks. Her engines were gone, her shields bleeding sparks, but still she fought, launching wave after wave of fighters to cover the ground forces below. Then the dreadnoughts targeted her. 3 colossal beams converged on the Resolute. The blast gutted her midsection, tearing steel apart like wet paper. For a moment she hung in the sky, burning, refusing to die. Then her hull split open, and escape pods burst free, scattering like glowing seeds across the atmosphere. Some streaked downward toward the surface. Others winked out, vaporized before they had a chance. Elias clenched his teeth as he fought on the ground, fire still flashing from his palm. He couldn't protect them, couldn't even look away from the Veyrak pressing him, but every falling pod was another reminder of how badly humanity was losing. One pod screamed overhead and crashed nearby, skidding across the plaza in a shower of sparks before slamming into rubble. The hatch burst open, smoke pouring out, and a figure stumbled free. Lieutenant Mara. She had been a pilot, one of the best. Her fighter call sign whispered with respect in fleet comms. Now she was on the ground, uniform torn, helmet gone, clutching a rifle in both hands. Her eyes widened as she saw Elias, saw the mark blazing on his palm as he struck another Veyrak down in a storm of fire. "My God," she breathed. "It's real." There was no time for shock. She raised her rifle and opened fire. Precise. Bursts cutting down warriors trying to circle behind Elias. Together they formed an unspoken rhythm. Elias blazing a path through the thickest fighters, Mara covering the blind spots he couldn't reach. Her shots cracked like thunder, tearing through weak points in armor. For the first time since dawn, Elias wasn't alone. Reports of what was happening in the plaza spread through comms like wildfire. Soldiers scattered across Zathra, tired. Cornered, nearly broken, heard the message. The man with the burning hand fights on. The aliens falter before him. And against all odds, humanity rallied. Fighters in orbit pressed back, their formations tightening, carving through Veyrak wings with newfound ferocity. Dropships turned suicidal runs into coordinated counterstrikes, unloading troops into enemy positions. Infantry that had been falling back dug in once more, using the chaos in the skies and the rumors of Elias to push harder than they thought possible. The mark on Elias's palm was no longer just a weapon, it was hope. But hope did not erase reality. The Veyrak were still stronger, their dreadnoughts still hammering the fleet. Elias and Mara still fought in ruins drenched with blood. Every moment was bought with lives, human and alien alike. Mara ducked behind a collapsed wall, reloading as plasma bolts tore past. "We can't hold like this forever," she shouted. Elias hurled a wave of fire that sent 5 warriors tumbling, then collapsed to one knee, coughing blood. His voice came ragged but steady. "We don't need forever. We need now." The Veyrak pressed harder, their commander still waiting, holding his line back until the humans were exhausted. Elias could feel it. The final clash was coming. His veins burned with the mark's power, his body breaking beneath its weight. But he refused to stop. Not with Mara beside him, not with the fleet still alive above. The sky was burning, the ground was broken. Humanity was outnumbered, outgunned, on the edge of collapse. But for the first time since the war began, the Veyrak weren't advancing with certainty. They hesitated, their eyes flicking to the glowing hand that kept striking them down, their ears filled with rumors of a prophecy they could not ignore. The tide hadn't turned yet, but it had begun to shift. The Veyrak commander finally moved. Until now he had stood at the rear, watching as Elias burned through wave after wave of warriors. His presence was like a shadow over the battlefield. His soldiers fought harder knowing he was there, yet none dared approach him. Now he stepped forward, each stride deliberate, his war spear dragging sparks across the blackened stone. The plaza fell into a hush. Even the warriors still circling Elias pulled back, leaving space as their leader advanced. The commander was a giant compared to the others, his armor etched with glowing runes, his weapon thrumming with power so intense the air around it shimmered. Mara muttered under her breath, "That's no ordinary soldier." Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. His lungs burned, his veins seared with fire, his muscles trembled with exhaustion. Yet he forced himself upright, wiping blood from his mouth as the commander stopped only a few paces away. "You wear the mark," the alien growled, his voice a thunderous echo. "But you are no chosen. You are a thief, and I will end your blasphemy." Then the commander lunged. The spear moved faster than Elias expected, a blur of blue lightning. He barely twisted aside, the weapon tearing through the steps where he had stood, stone exploding outward. The shockwave threw him back, cracking his ribs against a rubble. Mara opened fire, rounds sparking off the alien's armor, but the commander swung the spear in a wide arc, releasing a wave of energy that blasted her aside. Elias staggered up just as the next strike came. He raised his palm instinctively. Fire met lightning. The clash detonated like a bomb, shockwaves ripping across the plaza, scattering rubble and throwing warriors off their feet. For a moment, the two forces locked, sparks and flame twisting into a storm between them. The commander pushed harder. "This fire will consume you!" he roared, forcing Elias down to one knee. Elias gritted his teeth. His arm shook under the pressure, the mark blazing brighter than ever, searing through his bones. "Then it burns with me," he spat, shoving upward with everything he had. The energy erupted, a column of fire punching the sky. The commander staggered but did not fall. His spear slashed across Elias's chest, cutting deep. Pain flared white-hot, but Elias refused to drop. He slammed his palm against the alien's armor, forcing fire directly into it. The runes along the commander's chest glowed, trying to resist. For a heartbeat, Elias thought the armor would hold, then cracks spread across it, glowing like molten rivers. The commander bellowed, striking Elias through the shoulder with the spear, pinning him against the shattered wall. Mara screamed, struggling to rise, but she couldn't reach him. Elias gasped, blood spilling from the wound. He was trapped, weaponless, impaled. The commander leaned close, his jagged teeth bared in triumph. "You die here, human! Your fire dies with you!" Elias raised his trembling hand, gripping the shaft of the spear. The mark flared so bright, it blinded the plaza. The fire surged into the weapon, racing up its length, devouring the energy that powered it. The glow spread into the commander's body, cracks bursting across his armor. The alien roared in fury, then in agony, before his entire form erupted in a burst of white fire. For a moment he was a figure of flame, outlined against the ruin. Then he crumbled into ash, the spear disintegrating with him. Silence fell. Elias ripped the broken shaft from his shoulder, stumbling forward, half blind, blood pouring down his arm. The plaza was filled with 300 Veyrak warriors. They had raised their weapons, prepared to strike the instant their leader triumphed. But now they froze, staring at the ashes that had been their commander, then at the human who stood. Against them, with fire still blazing from his hand, one warrior lowered his spear, then another. Then another. The sound of metal shafts hitting stone echoed across the square as the entire horde dropped to their knees in unison. 300 voices growled in a single guttural chant, bowing to the human who had killed their chosen leader. Mara's rifle lowered slowly, disbelief written across her face. They're kneeling," she whispered. Elias swayed, nearly collapsing, but the sight anchored him. His hand still burned like a star, his body broken and bleeding, but he had done what no one believed possible. He had made an army kneel. For the first time in the war, humanity wasn't only surviving. They were feared. The battlefield lay in eerie silence after the Veyrak commander turned to ash. 300 warriors knelt in perfect unison, their war spears pressed to the ground. The air still shimmered from the firestorm, smoke rising from shattered walls and scorched corpses. Where minutes ago the plaza had been a storm of death, now it was a cathedral of stillness, the kind that followed something holy, or something terrible. Elias stood swaying at the center, his body broken. His shoulder bled freely from the wound where the spear had impaled him. His chest burned with deep slashes, and every breath rattled as if it would be his last. Yet the mark on his hand still glowed, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. It painted the ruins in light, bathing both human and alien in its fire. Mara rushed to him, slipping beneath his arm to hold him upright. His legs nearly gave, but he forced himself to stay standing. He couldn't fall now, not when the enemy bowed before him. "They're not fighting anymore," Mara whispered, her voice trembling between awe and disbelief. "You ended it." Elias's lips cracked into a faint bloody smile. "Not ended, changed." His eyes scanned the kneeling army. They're waiting for what comes next. Above them, the war still raged. The skies were ablaze, fleets locked in brutal combat. Human cruisers burned against the shadows of dreadnoughts, fighter squadrons tearing each other apart in furious spirals. The Veyrak still held the advantage in space, their massive guns pounding the Terran fleet into scraps. But word of what happened on the ground traveled fast. Across comm channels, desperate voices carried the story. The commander is dead. The bay, fire-marked soldier made the Veyrak kneel. Those words changed everything. Human ships rallied with new ferocity. Squadrons that had been retreating wheeled around and dove back into the fight, their battle cries filling the channels. Captains ordered ramming runs instead of retreats. Troops dug in harder on the ground, screaming Elias's name as they pushed forward. The broken Terran line hardened, and for the first time in the battle, the Veyrak fleet faltered. Elias heard it all faintly through his comm, but he could feel it more than hear it. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were rising. One of the kneeling warriors looked up, his alien eyes fixed on Elias. In a voice deep and guttural, he said, "The flame chooses. We obey." Others echoed the words, their chant rolling across the ruins until the plaza shook with it. "We obey. We obey." Elias tightened his grip on Mara's arm. "I don't want their obedience," he muttered. "But you've got it," Mara said. "Whether you want it or not, they see you as something more. You can end this." Another wave of exhaustion crashed over him. His vision blurred and he nearly collapsed again, but the chant of the warriors held him upright. He realized they weren't just bowing to him, they were waiting for his command. He raised his burning hand high. The glow brightened until it washed over the entire square and the chant died into silence. "Then fight," Elias rasped, his voice carrying despite its weakness. "Not for gods, not for temples. Fight to end this slaughter. Stand with us." For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the nearest warrior slammed the butt of his spear into the ground in salute. Others followed. One after another, 300 weapons struck stone in a thunderous rhythm, a pledge to the human who bore the fire. Above, the Terran fleet saw the impossible. Veyrak ships breaking formation, turning on their own kind. Confusion ripped through. The enemy lines as warriors on the ground and captains in orbit began fracturing, some surrendering, others outright defecting. What had been a crushing defeat twisted into chaos. The tide turned. Mara held Elias close as his body finally gave out. He collapsed to his knees, then to the blood-soaked stone, the mark still glowing even as his strength failed. His vision dimmed. But he saw the impossible. Alien warriors who had come to kill him now standing guard over him, shielding him from harm. "You see?" he whispered, voice barely audible. "They kneel to us." Mara squeezed his hand. Tears, cutting lines through the grime on her face. "No, they kneel to you." He smiled faintly, the firelight flickering in his fading eyes. Around him, the war shifted, humanity pushing forward, victory no longer a dream but a reality carved from fire and blood. Elias Kale, the soldier who should have died a dozen times over, became something else that day. Not just a fighter, not just a survivor, but a legend. The man who faced 300 spears with empty hands and made an army kneel, and in that moment, the galaxy learned the truth. Humanity would not bow. Humanity would burn, and in burning, they would rise.